Hey everybody, how you guys doing? Hope you guys are doing good. Got another Greek philosophy video for you here today. Had to wait for the construction beeping to slow down and or stop. We'll find out. And now my cat is playing with a rattly toy on the floor, but that's all right. Today we're going to talk about one of the early pre-Socratic philosophers, one of my favorites, not Heraclitus, my favorite, and actually not one of the three who formed the pre-Socratic triad of Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and then finally Parmenides. This is Xenophanes. We're going to talk about Xenophanes today, little song and dance about Xenophanes in Greek philosophy. He is a skeptic somewhat and a cynic somewhat like Heraclitus and Diogenes, but he is a different sort of bird who is coming a bit earlier. He famously, the most famous thought of Xenophanes, the most famous thought of Heraclitus is you can never step in the same river twice. The most famous thought that's most often quoted of Xenophanes is if horses and oxen could draw or carve, they would draw or carve the gods in their own image. That is Xenophanes' idea. He does not say there are no gods. Sometimes people seem to think that he is saying there are no gods, there are no living forces that organize the forms of things. He actually means something more like, I imagine, although I don't know the guy, wasn't my time. But he himself thinks that horses and oxen would have horses and oxen gods. He does not mean there are no gods. In the same way, we could say horses and oxen would have horse-ox theories of science. That doesn't mean we don't have theories of science or we don't believe in theories of science. It's just that they would draw the theories and images of science to fit themselves. Wittgenstein said if we did math on plexiglass cubes, that would change math entirely. And this is quite similar to that, in a sense, although a bit from the other side. So Xenophanes was born in Colophon. I do have to say some of these names carefully and slowly, as well as in the Indian class, because I don't say many Greek or Indian names often that are the lesser spoken names. But Xenophanes was born near Miletus and Ephesus, the two city-states of the Milesians and Heraclitus, the other major pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, other than Pythagoras, who was from Samos, I believe, in a near coast of Italy, and then you have many of these guys are not in Athens or of Athens, any of these. We then start to have the whole situation shift to Athens, and that will come soon. And the Athenians have heard of all of these pre-Socratics, many of them at least, and they are quoting them or interpreting their work. So the Persians conquered Colophon in 546. Xenophanes lived sometime around 570 to 475 BCE, other side of Jesus. The Persians conquered Colophon when Xenophanes was in his 20s, in 546. Xenophanes composed poetry like Homer and Hesiod. He wrote his works in verse, which was more common at the time. He did not say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and write out in whole paragraphs. He may have, but we have some of his verse, like with Homer and Hesiod and the earliest of Greek philosophers. Remember, Plato actually wrote plays. Aristotle also wrote plays, and what we have of the works of Aristotle may in fact be his lecture notes for or from his students. And those seem like long paragraphs of talking things out in long-form prose. So Xenophanes had poetry, which we still have 40 fragments of. They are famous for ridiculing his fellow poets and philosophers for their views, and while a lot of his surviving poetry doesn't have to do with philosophy or skepticism, it is for that he's remembered. It is for his questioning of anthropomorphism and human perspective that he is most famous. Many of these thinkers, I will refer often to thinkers as more dogmatic or more skeptical, in that they believe more in objective versus subjective truth. That is along with that everybody in certain ways have things they think are more objective-ish and more subjective-ish, and Xenophanes is no different. He, like Heraclitus, believes there are things like gods and fire, but then he also believes that horses and oxen would theorize as horse and an oxen would about fire and us and the gods. So he is not everything is completely false or subjective or nihilistic, but he definitely questions the shape of objectivity itself and how anthropomorphic it is, and he is most famous for this before Heraclitus. Heraclitus comes along soon, around this time, actually, And he is around this time, and Xenophanes is said to have been a student of Anaximander, like Pythagoras, and he is said to have taught Parmenides, which places him right around the same time as Heraclitus. And Heraclitus does refer to him, so he is around the same time and or older and or younger than Heraclitus. It isn't perfectly known their dates or when exactly one came first than the other, because of course we don't know as well. But Heraclitus and Xenophanes are very similar. Heraclitus is my favorite of ancient Greek philosophers. Xenophanes only has fewer fragments remembered, but is very similar. So Xenophanes was critical of Greek culture, valuing military might and athletic ability over the intellect. I have mentioned the Greeks in many places point out we're manly men. We also have book larnin. Pericles famously, I point out often and quote often to teach Greek philosophy, says we have learned like others of the East and other folks. He probably, again, means somebody like we have learned like Persians and Egyptians, but at the same, they're not exactly eastward, but that we have not compromised our manliness. He means something like the Tigris-Euphrates people are all book larnin. We have that also, but we're also frat boys who are all strong and tough and can arm wrestle, which of course makes the sense. And it is quite glorious, again, as the Greeks get smart, and white people especially, and the West, which is how we refer to white Europeans after Auschwitz especially, words from the 1700s, but then especially used for white people as white is more inclusive now, you definitely have folks ridiculing how smart they are as they are saying they are smart, and the beginnings of something, for themselves anyway. Xenophanes was critical of all of this, and the only written text we have from the brief period of Athenian democracy, again, we have Pericles questioning all of that. So the Athenians value education, but they did see it as potentially effeminizing. In fact, the first people, it's a little slightly off subject, but if you look up about race, the white-faced scholar of China, sort of like the geisha of Japan and then earlier versions of that in China, a white person or white-skinned is usually somebody indoors, like a scholar or a queen, and they are often portrayed as effeminate because they're not darkened in the sun like a redneck or somebody like that. So often people who are more brute and hardcore are seen as tanned and bronzed, especially in the Greek day, and people who would be lighter in skin would be people kept indoors. Those wouldn't be manly, tough men. So even then, you don't even, China says white-faced scholar, and then you find India, China, and Islam referring to white people as favorable people a little bit even before white people like myself ever learned to sort of say that. And now actually talking about white people as white altogether, regardless of rednecks, is of course supposed to be a somewhat more civilized, educated people in racist conceptions, but is also, and socioeconomic conceptions, whatever have you, but is also not really entirely an indoor kept people in their own estimation, nor is it that all white people are educated or anything like that. But similarly, these guys would not have seen themselves as white and sickly according to Aristotle in complexion, nor would they have thought that they're just simply into book learning. Which again is good. I constantly point this out about the Greeks in context because they are mangled and misused. Just like the words rational and logical, if people think those are good things rather than everything, like technology is not a good thing. It is everything, like the Greeks. They certainly thought they were everything according to themselves, all good and bad anyway, of their fellow Greeks. So the Milesians, Xenophanes says that a city would not be well governed by a great boxer or sprinter. Perhaps a reality TV show host is best, but could only prosper under a wise and knowing leader. We have yet to try that. We can someday. That's still open. We got possibilities. We got enthusiasms, like Chicago. The Milesians, as shown previously, thought that the cosmos was divine and intelligent, but they were concerned with the processes in nature and the elements rather than the anthropomorphic gods so much, although they certainly are talking about a bunch of gods. Thales says all things are full of gods and spirits, but they simply aren't talking about Zeus versus Hera, etc. so much. It's implicit in the Milesians. It's not as explicitly said the forces, though. They don't say the forces that rule the cosmos are non-anthropomorphic or properly of the time more abstractly anthropomorphic, but don't have a face or, say, have a certain number of limbs, which when Xenophanes says the horses and oxen could carve the gods, he is questioning in a certain sense whether God has feet, or the gods have feet. in one of the early, in the book of Genesis, it says that God stomps around the Garden of Eden and is upset because he cannot find Adam, and says, "Where are you?" And some have pointed out that in Genesis, the Yahweh, Jehovah, the polytheistic turned monotheistic deity, definitely is angry, which, if omniscient, need not be angry and would know where Adam is, even if, of course, telling Adam, "Hey, fess up, tell me where you are," actually seems to say, "I can't see you," like Zeus would not see something or other, and has feet, which, again, God is not often portrayed as having feet in the entire texts in the library of the text that is the Bible. This is Xenophanes in the Greek tradition, and the Greek tradition is the New Testament is written in Greek. People have wrestled with theology and science in the names of Greek thought, and others, Muslims and others who are influenced by all this. This is actually whether or not God has feet or not, or whether or not that makes any sense at all. You might say, for instance, and I do like driving this towards the present day and questioning our own beliefs, I meet a lot of people who talk about science is nature. Well, science is human practices. Nature itself couldn't be scientific like scientists are. Is nature itself mathematical or scientific, or are math and science human practices? Well, I think that they're human practices, so I like Xenophanes and Heraclitus because they say, well, you can be as mathematical as you like with rocket ships. That doesn't make nature and salt itself mathematical, as much as that does work very much. But I will table that, of course, and not go on and on until I prove that either way, and can't. But that does seem to be the sort of thing. If you are questioning whether or not the gods have feet or faces, or there is a god or not, or whether or not the universe is mathematical, according to more secular post-Protestant types, that itself would be these kinds of questions. And that's why ancient Indian thinkers, Greek thinkers, and Chinese thinkers who ask these things are working their way towards our modern conceptions. All of them, it isn't that white people, according to the Proud Boys, built the modern world. Actually, India, Islam, China, a bunch of people, all leads up to gunpowder, and this built the ancient, medieval, and modern world all together. You'll notice a bunch of Protestants aren't talking about white people building the medieval world. They're not so Catholic as much anymore, although I think some of the Proud Boys are. But yeah, basically, there's a lot of history that's gone on. And Xenophanes is openly ridiculing people who have their conceptions too much. My cat is jumping up on things. Are you anthropomorphic? Do you have feet? I think that's rather human of you. Yes. Is my cat scientific? I once heard, some philosophical person in an essay once wrote, he's walking up behind the mic. You want to chew on it? No. That a dog might do algebra in their head to catch a frisbee. As ludicrous as that is, yeah, all of that. Anywho's, I'm going to worry about my cats being mathematical and scientific at some other time. Maybe a different life, when I'm a cat, and I have proper mathematics. Let's see. Speaking of shifting the cargo around, the Milesians were questioning this, and in India, logicians such as Kanada and Gautama, as well as the philosophers of unorthodox non-Hindu Jains and Buddhists, they speak of forces other than gods at work in the cosmos without explicitly calling the anthropomorphic gods into question. You find that a lot of people in India, Greece, and China who are philosophers are probably not straight saying the gods or science are wrong, but they are the ones who, in a culture, say, but do you really know what science or the gods are? Do you? And then they force feed you hemlock. Or at least that hasn't come yet, but it will soon, if you're wealthy enough to afford the hemlock rather than being killed in public in front of everyone. So, which was the traditional punishment for questioning anything in society at the time, unless you were wealthy enough to buy off the guards or something, as is suggested in Plato's dialogues we'll get to. So, Xenophanes ridicules the idea of anthropomorphic forces, calling it conceit. Again, I would say if mathematics is nature rather than human practices, and a crystalline being who wants Captain Kirk to teach the crystalline being the language of love, if all this has to be mathematic and arithmetic, then sure. But if not, then yeah, it's a bit conceited to simply say the universe is mathematical, a la human hands as opposed to oxen hooves. Xenophanes says it is foolish to see the cosmos ruled by human-like chaotic and selfish beings rather than order itself. This is very Heraclitus. Heraclitus says Pallas, the goddess, she should not glory in the blood of battle. Goddesses should not say, hey, this is beautiful, I love blood. They should be our betters. So oddly here we definitely see, like with monotheism to polytheism, which is very much, this is in the vein of all that, in the Greco-Roman, Egyptian, Israelite ancient traditions, people are wrestling with polytheism, and so they are asking, in names of what we would now call seculars and non-religious, just what is their truth, but also in terms of monotheism, which is coming along here, that they are wondering if it is conceited to think the gods have a side in the battle rather than God monotheistically is using the Persians and Egyptians against Israel because God is all the gods and there are no other ones. And it's all just truth itself or being or consciousness itself without hands or feet moving everything around. We are going to get specifically to whether or not the gods can move things with hands or mind. That is Anaxagoras and others coming very soon after this. In fact, Anaxagoras, I believe, is taught by, if I have in the notes here, is that, yes, no. Xenophanes taught Parmenides, but Anaxagoras seems to know of Xenophanes, and Anaxagoras thinks it's a very big problem to have a mind of all, and he does believe in a mind of all that does move and shake everything, but it itself does not move, which is a problem with Anaxagoras. How can God move things without movable parts? Well, that's what the angels and Jesus and other things are for, somewhat theologically, and that has its roots somewhat not just in Greek thought, but in the human mind, which Greek thought is expressing very much here. So Mutazalites, the sect of Muslims who argue that God is reason itself in the universe, similarly, in fact, like Xenophanes, who argues there's a mind throughout everything that's simply reason itself and consciousness itself, and that's what really is. Very much like Anaxagoras. The Mutazalite Muslims, similarly, after this, reading Greeks, reading Indians, reading others, likely or exposed to those theories, argued that God is so perfect reason. The Mutazalites argued, heretically, according to some Muslims. I don't believe there are many there's probably modern orders of Mutazalites, but they were of the, what we often call the Middle Ages, around the year 1000, and others as Europeans were getting their act together. The Mutazalites were very much rationalists, very much like Locke and Kant and other people, who, Locke is technically not a rationalist, but people, rationalists like Descartes and Kant, who believe that God cannot contradict God's self, that math, in a certain sense, you could leave the door open and not be heretical, but technically, if God is pure math and pure reason, God can't make 2 + 3 = 6. Which is actually what the Mutazalites would have argued. God can't contradict God's self and do something not in accord with reason and nature, because God is reason and nature, which, of course, well, anyway, online you can debate, could Jesus microwave a burrito so hot even he, capital H, couldn't eat it. If you have omnipotence, that creates certain sorts of interesting problems for if it's all ordered, then can order contradict itself, or can there be miracles, or could there be any, or miracles if those are the workings of the laws of physics mysteriously, can that go back on itself or undo itself? Well, if it's pure reason itself, sort of not. Again, and this creates a problem of evil. If Xenophanes and the Mutazalites are right that the world is reasonable, why is it, as the skeptics will tell us in Greece, is the world so fair but also so unfair, and both human judgments seem to work so perfectly in opposite ways? If it's all order and reason, it almost seems like there should not be suffering and there should not be contradiction to that, which is what any child would wrestle with, trying to decide whether or not to believe in monotheism or not, which you still find being a prevalent issue, and you will find people accusing each other of contradiction on both sides. As I like to say with this sort of material, atheists say you can't explain God, therefore nature, and folks who are theological say you can't explain nature, therefore God. And the chicken and the egg problem just gets kicked down the road a bit. So what came up with God? As Eric Andre says, flashing back to college in the Eric Andre show, after a bit of intoxication, it seems, on camera, says, who does God pray to? An even bigger God? And if there are theological problems, not that religion is unreasonable and science and Greek thought is. or isn't. Not that philosophy and religion aren't rational and science is. There are certain interesting logical problems, as in repeated reasoning problems people get into in India, Greece, and China, and we still do, trying to talk about if science is good, then how does bad happen in the name of science? Is that unscientific science? Is that if science is self-awareness by nature, and we aren't aware of how much we're building helicopters in the world? Is that non-scientific science when it's helicopters, but then it gets its act right when they fly right? It's a little difficult to say. But yes, people get into, I am the kind of person trying to find these problems in people's arguments, so forgive me if I find them in your beliefs, but I am trying to find them in people's beliefs in politics, art, religion, science, and trying to see the psychological mind states of this in people, which is the way I choose to do it. Other people choose to shore it up in a culture and say it's better than others. I don't like that kind of supremacism. I don't think it's important, especially I don't know why we can afford it in this day and age with the world and everything, and I'm not even thinking we're going to environmentally collapse necessarily, but just given we could, yeah, believing science is so scientific, believing that industry is more or less scientific, that's where the problem comes in. Yeah, people can anthropomorphize these things and put this or that on this or that. I do go on and wax on a little bit here because, again, these are very interesting problems people have had for thousands upon thousands of years in different forms, but whether or not the cosmos is rational, thus there's order, but why is there chaos or evil? These are all things where Xenophanes is one of the first thinkers in human thought to come forward and say Parmenides is a bit much the same, that the universe is rational, either mathematical or in some sense conscious and intentional, such that human practices are not just human, but in some sense divine, in some sense perfect, ideal, abstract, what have yous. Hey, buddy. How you doing? What's up? Do you want to get up? Okay. Yes. He was going for the mic. He was going for the computer cords, or possibly the microphone. So he gets he gets a timeout by the window, which he likes. It's his own private timeout. So, let's see. Where were we here? We were talking about omnipotence and me being aware of my cats, I believe. So, Xenophanes said the Homeric Olympian gods are immortal and disorderly, lower in many acts than human beings, which is why he's arguing Homer is a liar. Heraclitus, at the same time, said Homer and Hesiod should be beaten publicly, which is kind of more traditional punishment, for lying about the gods and saying that Zeus is horny. Different gods like battle and shed a bunch of blood. Very much like God in Genesis stomps around the garden, according to parts of the text, says, I can't see you, I'm all pissed off. And in others says, I understand, all is good. Because there is wrestling with monotheism and polytheism in the various texts put together of the first books and then latter books of the Old Testament. This is why the prophets of the Old Testament say stop being polytheistic, Israel, and start being more so monotheistic. The text definitely puts it that the Israelites were monotheistic from the very beginning. Now it is of people's opinion, actually, they were wrestling with polytheism the whole time, which is why it is in the text. And we can see, whether or not you like that or hate that or what have you, this is the same wrestling with monotheism and polytheism here. I am saying, again, to bring it to modern scientific context, if the reason I keep pointing out about science rather than art is because, of course, people very much believe in the technology and science of today and that is the truth and what we use as practical, pragmatic, most established truth, and I would not contradict that. But at the same time, if many different corporations do science on helicopters, is science self-aware as a spirit? Well, not if they're all keeping it to themselves and slowly working it out and not doing all the trade secrets. So is it one truth or is it many? It's a problem of the one and the many and the gods right here. Are the warring forces of the economy or nature, are they many gods with many perspectives, or are they one god with one perspective? And if they're one, why does the economy or world look like it does? These are very it's the problem of evil works with the economy or science, much like it does with religion or anything. If it's also nice, according to folks, why hasn't it gotten its act together yet? That actually is something people have been asking themselves from the earliest of city-states, and I am somebody to constantly point out about early culture. We should learn all about modernity and figure this is thousands of years of the same human behavior. Again, that's safe to say, and I'm happy for people to then find contradictory other sides to this, because I do think that side needs to be put forward a bit more. So, Notice the wrestling with the subjectivity and the objectivity in all of this. We didn't just get over these problems. We wrestle with subjectivity and objectivity, with art, science, politics, all of these things in our lives as best as we can, knowing what we know. So the gods seem to somewhat have some kind of anthropomorphic form in that they're conscious. Conscience is more the morality involved in Socrates talking to his daimon. Xenophanes says the Ethiopians say the gods are dark-skinned and flat-nosed, while the Thracians, like the slave girl who laughed at Thales, who probably was a bit ginger and white in complexion, that Xenophanes says the Thracians see their gods as blue-eyed and red-haired. So isn't this awesome? At a time when people actually are not using the words black and white as we use them, we definitely have Greeks saying, well, there are people darker in skin, there are people lighter in skin. The lighter and darker in skin are also human beings. We're extra civilized, though. But you do see this in several places where the Greeks are not saying we are the white people or we are the dark people. They are saying, well, look, there's white people up over there, lighter people, not white people. I misspoke. They would say there's light-skinned people there, dark-skinned people there, not white people, black people. That would be more sick, unhealthy people for Aristotle, thinking about like what your complexion looks like or your eyes. Something like you're reading health in a person would be white and black complexion temporarily, not your permanent complexion like I am a white guy. So again, much like a little bit like the Thracians myself, although I'm not a ginger, I am blue-eyed. Xenophanes says, well, the Africans somewhat portray gods as Ethiopians portray gods as African-looking, and the Thracians present gods as more Thracian European-looking, up more northwesternlies, right? Notice we're clearly presenting people northwesternly as lighter in complexion. So, and people to the, southwest here, I believe Ethiopia ways, if I know my geography at all, south, is a yes. That effectively, that they are, yes, I keep saying Egypt is to the west of Greece. I need to check the map a little bit more often. Geography is not my strongest suit. But yes, to the south more, and slightly to the east now that I'm looking at the map, they are clearly presenting northern people as lighter in skin. Anaximander with the map says there are mythical snow people to the north and mythical fire people to the south. I think of Bjork always and think go Team Mythic Snow People, although there's been enough cheerleading for that in the name of the West and white a little bit, but hey, go Team Mythic Snow People for Anaximander. So Anaximander and Xenophanes both would have thought, they don't think they're the lightest skinned of people, actually, and they don't seem to be portraying themselves with blue skin, I was going to say, the Blue Man Group, with the blue eyes. So, come here, buddy. We're starting to scratch stuff. Come here. Come here, pal. Speaking of such, are you a Thracian slave girl? You get a kiss. Actually, don't kiss your Thracian slave girl. Don't kiss anybody. Don't have slaves. Jeez. Actually kiss people and don't have slaves. I misspoke. Anyway, the point is, yes, as wonderfully uncomfortable as all of this subject is somewhat, it's actually pretty interesting. Again, I have a lot of fun teaching this kind of stuff to students because the ancient world is nuts, but it's very human all the same, isn't it? This cat's going to give me a hard time today, aren't we? Brother and kin. Buddy. We're going to hold you for a second. Somebody's getting extra scratchy because I closed the window and he's a little bit frantic. You need outside, don't you? You want to see outside and you want those crazy trucks to go by. Yes, you do. I close the window and I close the curtains so that these guys don't make as much noise. What are you doing, buddy? Okay. Let's work our way through this here. So, again, the most quoted line from Xenophanes' poetry. Thus, again, fitting with both you have here, the Ethiopians present dark-skinned, flat-nosed gods, and the Thracians present light-skinned, blue-eyed, red-haired gods. And Xenophanes is telling us this quite openly. He then is quoted as saying, if oxen and horses had hands and were able to draw with their hands like humans, horses would draw the gods as horses, and oxen would draw the gods as oxen, and each would give them the same shape as themselves. This is sometimes because the word is probably for draw craft here. I am not the language guy. I freely admit that. So I have to go to different translations and look at them, and I line them up with India, Greece, China, different things, because I don't have time for all the languages, unfortunately. In fact, I'm not very good with languages, I fully admit. So draw here, however, is sometimes translated as, it's something like craft, draw, carve. So it actually is not totally inappropriate, and I often translate the line as, could draw and carve, as I said initially. They would draw, paint, and carve the gods. There's something like art or craft the gods here is what it says. When we say craft the gods, of course I could say that, but it sort of makes more sense in modern English to say draw or carve rather than craft the gods, but you get it. That basically means draw, paint, carve, etc. What's up, buddy? Yes. So many have argued, again, that today, I have much in the notes about this, I've already ranted, but yes, we can definitely bring this up today and wonder how anthropomorphic our theories, mathematics, and other things are. Again, as Wittgenstein said, if we draw on plexiglass, math on plexiglass see-through cubes, it might change math entirely, and we would still have the same hands. When I was, I think about it all the time, I used to listen to Schoolhouse Rock growing up. It wasn't the 70s, it was after that, but Schoolhouse Rock is from the 70s. And in there, there is, if any of you know the 12 song, it blew my mind as a kid, and it's very Wittgensteinian to say, and very Xenophanes, to say if we had 6 hands on each hand, we would count to 12 as quickly as we do 10, as they tell you in Schoolhouse Rock in the song of multiples of 12. And in such a case, 144 would be written 100, and we would write 12, probably 10, the song speculates, Indian, Arabic numerals, not Greek or Roman, and then we would just have some other symbols for 11 and 12 where it would be 9, 1 digit 10, 1 digit 11, and then 2 digits 1 and 0 for 12, because we would still have a base 0, 1 sort of system. And we would just do 144 and we'd calculate odds of the same way it's easy to multiply 10, it would be just as easy to multiply by 12. That's what it tells you in the Schoolhouse Rock. That blew my mind as a kid, and there are many ways like that, where if you think about, for Wittgenstein, colorblind people snap right into their mind state and then snap out of it as easy as we can, not that we know exactly what it is if we are not to be colorblind. Definitely shows that we have a mind, as Alison Gopnik says in The Philosophical Baby. She teaches has psychology and child development at Berkeley, that children love Oscar the Grouch. They love Oscar the Grouch as a kid because he loves trash, and that's icky, and they think it's hilarious. Cookie Monster, of course, is teaching people, child behavior and how to look at yourself in certain ways. I think he eats vegetables now. And in the same similar sense, but a different thing here, more Xenophanes, children love Oscar the Grouch, thinking that terrible things are good and good things are terrible. They find that hilarious. They don't think Oscar's the most evil guy ever. They think it's kind of funny, and Oscar kind of has a weird personality, which he does. He's a grouch. But yeah, that would be that children, as they learn language, are smart enough to begin understanding perspective, one might say wisdom a bit, that they are wise enough occasionally to look at other people's perspective and thus use that for thought. Exactly like Xenophanes could be considered a philosopher because he is sitting here saying, well, the Ethiopians and Thracians draw their gods, paint their gods like horses and oxen would, looking like themselves. So what do you think the Greek gods look like? I'll give you a hint. Yep, that's right. The Romans. That's exactly what the Greek gods look like. You know what I mean? So yes, the Xenophanes denied that there is any hierarchy of gods, directly attacking the idea of Zeus as a prime father, ruler. If the gods are supreme, they can have nothing above them, not even themselves, Xenophanes argues. He does not argue for monotheism so much, he sort of is. Again, these are Greek philosophers who are, like Plato and Aristotle, comfortable enough to be turned into effectively monotheists, or used by monotheists, in a sense, because it's all there, in a sense, for there to be consciousness and no hierarchy of the gods. Technically, Xenophanes seems to... Heraclitus says they're one and many, both. Xenophanes seems to be talking about there's many conscious entities that control nature, but they're not as we picture them, which is still anthropomorphic, for there to be many individuals and for them to have different sorts of consciousness as part of one thing they share is actually still quite human in shape. So the immortal and infinite cannot be constrained by anything, unlike mortals. We are constrained by time, this, that. Well, then why are there many versus one is a problem here. They'd be constrained by manyness out of oneness or what have you. This is, though, it wouldn't get you killed to believe this and also believe in Homeric and Hesiod's theogony and Homer's traditional cultures and epics and odes. An atheist, by the way, at this time, Xenophanes could be accused of atheism. Socrates, at his trial, says he's being accused of impiety and atheism, and he says, are you accusing me of having no gods or different gods? Somebody might accuse Xenophanes of the same. In fact, Socrates, I believe, says I'm being accused of being Anaxagoras, who has very similar views here, somewhat to Xenophanes, is a little more, it is the big one mind, although Xenophanes also suggests that. And Socrates says, what, am I, Anaxagoras? Like, I'm not that stupid. So, lots of different angles here on whether or not there are gods, or there's really one, or whether or not if you say there's really one spirit and doesn't have hands or feet, with Yahweh in the Garden of Eden, somewhat in the Genesis text, you would have here people questioning these, but not questioning them too much, because you could be killed like Socrates for doing this. As Socrates knows, he says, what am I, that other guy who ran out of town, Anaxagoras, away from you guys when you charged him? Yeah, I'm not that dumb, am I? I'm right here. I mean, hey, you put me on trial. That didn't save him either, though. Mainly because he, young people rioted, burned things down, didn't like stuff, something like that. So for Xenophanes, the gods do not meddle in human affairs, and they are not, in a certain sense, entirely many. There is a kind of oneness to them. Xenophanes is outspoken a bit about this, but again, it is difficult to pin him down, especially with only having fragments. Many are quick to jump to monotheism. I would rather sort of, as with Indian and Chinese thought, this is kind of polytheism turning into there's also truth and consciousness, which is, in a certain sense, a one thing behind it all, which then does pave the way for many to, in certain ways, reject, in the Abrahamic tradition anyway, reject very much polytheism explicitly and go with something more like monotheism. So, Xenophanes says there is one divine mind, which is not at all like mortal humans in either body or mind. Well, that's odd. Why is it mind? It says all of it him sees, all thinks, all hears, but without effort, it shakes all things by its thought. This is again, I was putting this in the mouth of Anaxagoras. Anaxagoras says something effectively almost the same, that there is a problem. Plato tries to solve this with his demiurge in the Timaeus, the book following the Republic. If you have the unmoved mover, which is Aristotle, the student of Plato, how does the unmoved mover move everything in the angels? I mean, in the Bible, God doesn't come to Mary and say, hey, buddy, he has Gabriel, for the Muslims, like, go and be his voice and announce stuff with trumpets. It's like that's the voice of God as a being. So it's kind of polytheistic somewhat weirdly, but it's now in the name, these aren't gods, those are angels. So it's a similar kind of thing here. If it, without any effort, shakes and moves all things, how does the unmoved mover move all things? Well, for Aristotle and Plato, there'd have to be a secondary being that then starts moving, and that's the demiurge, and then there's other stuff. Plato and Aristotle will argue about that later through their texts. But in a certain sense, can there be perception or thought without motion? Could you have an absolutely still mind that could see or hear anything? Well, the only way it would is if it is everything, and if it's one and the same as everything, and that would be pantheism. The problem with that, which you also find here, is people want there to be a one mind, but they want it to also, and one objectivity of science, but they want it to be superior to the average person's intelligence and subjectivity, because otherwise the objectivity of science and the mind of God is just what any jerk is. And that's not good enough for people, because they want it to have expertise, and they want it to be more like a human authority in their life. Again, so we have one mind rules over things and figures everything out, but that's not human-like. Well, that would be human authority-like, to have one mind over many and to figure out many minds and what they should do and coordinate. That actually, the only place you could see anything like that is human communities, which is how human beings get their understandings of polytheistic families and monotheistic authority figures. They would get it from that. By the way, again, as with all this stuff, I am remaining rather agnostic in theory here. I am not arguing there are or aren't polytheistic gods or a monotheistic God. Again, I am firm about that. I say that in the classroom all the time. I love sharing the history of this and asking people, and now what do you think? It's amazing. I am in no way suggesting people should or shouldn't believe in monotheism or shouldn't believe in polytheism. I always assume there's a couple of monotheists in my class. I assume there may be a person from a more traditional polytheistic culture who is simply a modern person living with a traditional culture in their lives that's more polytheistic. And I assume most of my students are secular science-believing folks. I don't change my material based on any of that. I don't, hopefully, as one can see, because I have material like this, and because I believe in talking to human beings who have human minds, so I'm not going to tell them to believe anything other than something like this happened, and think for yourself about all of these things. I am somebody who's taken the authority of the human mind a little bit more than the authority of Xenophanes, Catholic Church, law, science, theology, art, anything you like, really, which is a bunch of human hands, of course, unless it's oxen. Are oxen doing theology? Can bears be inhuman? I'm not sure. Let's go find some, try to play Parcheesi with them. We'll see how humane things get real quick. In this economy, So Xenophanes seems to remove the infinite categorically from particular things, which do move about. So there's particular things that aren't the mind, and then they're moved about by the unmoving mind. This, again, creates a wonderful problem where Plato and Aristotle do believe in this, and Plato and Aristotle will become important to Muslims and Christians for being an unmoved, perfect deity, and then down and below imperfect mortal movements arounds. Here again, how does an unmoving thing move anything? And it's perfectly fine by me, not the Mutazalites, fine by I, me, whomever. The Mutazalites would say because it can't contradict itself and is pure reason. If you believe a mind can contradict itself or do anything and we won't understand, then there really isn't any problem here much at all. And that's the sort of mystical answer one could give in the name of anything, actually. Well, it's beyond us. Whether or not you're polytheistic, monotheistic, secular, rational, anything. So Xenophanes agrees the cosmos is ruled and ordered by the divine, but he disagrees with the conceptions of the poets as well as the various people of the world. Anaximander says it is the infinite. And remember, apeiron. Xenophanes' teacher was supposedly Anaximander, who believes that it is all the apeiron, the infinite. So in fact, Xenophanes is creating a problem of an infinite perfection above, which then has to somehow touch the mortal imperfect below, which is very similar to Anaximander, Anaxagoras, a lot of Anaxes. Again, a lot of Annas in this crowd, none named Anna. And yes, this is something you find in much of the rest of the world wrestling with this and that. Some have said Xenophanes is the father of skepticism, and this was picked up by Heraclitus and Pyrrho. Pyrrho and the skeptics of Greece, skepticism is a Greek philosophy, and we can be skeptical about anything, really. Skeptos, meaning inquirer, somebody who keeps seeking, even after they find things. A cynic is dog-like, believes in being brute, somewhat hippie-ish, and the skeptics are continuously inquirers, believe all truth is subjective, so you must continue to seek truth out, rather proactively and optimistically. Xenophanes is a similar, somewhat optimistic skeptic. Nietzsche, like Xenophanes and Heraclitus, the modern German thinker who is incredibly influential in the modern world. He helped build the modern world. Nietzsche certainly did. Nietzsche, Marx, and other thinkers helped build the modern world far more than the Proud Boys or anybody else ever could. And he says we should distrust, Nietzsche does, the falsification of the world by grammar and logic. When I bring up, okay, so is the world mathematical? Does it have a human-like mind, a crystalline being-type mind? Those would be the sorts of thoughts where somebody in the 1800s would say, but we really ought to question the anthropomorphism now, regardless of what you want to believe. Nietzsche would not say simply don't believe in something. He would say go out and figure it out, whatever, for yourself, and don't believe him. That Xenophanes says, no one has seen nor will know the truth about the gods or all the things I speak of. For even if one should say what is true, they do not know, but rather place beliefs over all things. Now, placing beliefs on top of things would literally be, if Xenophanes knew Latin and he didn't, and especially not medieval Latin, superstition. To be superstitious is technically to superstand something, to superimpose something on top of something else. So if I think people who wear purple pants are evil, I am superstitious because I'm putting my prejudice and my judgments on top of the situation. Of course, if you believe, if you're skeptical enough, you would say human belief is itself very functional, pragmatic. superstition. Somewhat like Hume says, all belief is habit, prejudice, and all knowledge is belief, habit, prejudice, and assumption, which would be very Xenophanes, very skeptical. Although, again, the skeptics actually in the Greek world have yet to come along, and Xenophanes is supposed to be a major influence on them. You can see why. So, why would he talk? Heraclitus and Xenophanes both have to say something about, well, if I'm a human being, and I will say the same, if I'm yammering on and on to you in English, why should you listen to a single thing I say if what I say is very human? Well, because if you're an optimistic skeptic, doing more human is good, and it's bad, but it's what you're trying to do that's good. So, of course, it would be human and human-shaped. Xenophanes says, let these things be believed as resembling the truth. There are many Indian thinkers, I won't parse it out right now, you can go to the Indian notes, who very much say it is, if you are more skeptical, you would often say as a human being, probably in oral culture long before written cultures, I'm not telling you this is true, I'm telling you it's, well again, nothing in this book is true, and yet it is exactly the way things are. As that famous book about New Agers that's anthropology, modern anthropology about modern people, as Latour likes to do, is that yes, I am telling you as best as I can. I am telling you the best English words I can. They have a pragmatic difference and they can be fruitful in your life if you allow them to be good. But these are not fail-proof, and they're not foolproof, fail-proof, and they are fallible because they are human truths and human words. So there is some progress, though. And Xenophanes, again, seems an optimistic skeptic, like Socrates. Socrates says, keep pushing for the good, and when then asked in the earlier dialogues, he is much more like Xenophanes and Heraclitus until the Republic, Book 2 of the Republic, it seems. Socrates says, I think we can push for good. I don't know what good the form of the good is. This is the famous moment in the Republic where... Oh, I'm blanking on the name right now. The interlocutor, starts with a G, starts with a T. Oh man, I usually remember this right off the bat, and I am totally blanking on it. But one of Socrates' interlocutors, I'm going to remember it when I'm on another thought, basically says, well, if you don't know the form of the good, I'm out of here. And that is exactly when Socrates and Plato turn to, okay, wait a minute, this kind of skepticism isn't good enough. Let's get a more Pythagorean kind of ratio, kind of mathematical form of the good in our lives. And whether or not Socrates or Plato truly believe that is actually a very uber master question, because they're a little sneaky back and forth, Socrates being Plato's character, about whether or not that is completely escaping things and Pythagoras, and we know math is realsies for realsies, not just human view, because Plato leaves the window open, as does Socrates the whole time, that maybe when we say this is really the ratio in the math, we may be leaving the window open for, and yet these are the designs of human hands and still subjective because we cannot achieve the mind of itself. The entire uber true universal conscious plan way things actually are self-consciously. They've started up the beeping again. They are loading materials across the street day and night. But we're almost done with Xenophanes, so that's all right. We're going to finish it out here. We got another thought or two. And actually, the video's only 45 minutes long. Didn't take too many tangents around it this time. I am trying to only stick to the good tangents, not the wilder ones. But again, tend to drag on in the time a tiny bit. So, yes. Let's see. So Xenophanes, for Xenophanes, the world within the cosmos is eternal also, never having been born and never dying. That means that the earth has simply always been. And yet Xenophanes also says if there was no yellow honey, people would say that figs are much sweeter than they do. There are skeptics who later say if you go in the bathhouse, you're cold, you then come out, you're warm, and then you come out of the bathhouse and you're cold again because relative difference. And they also say young people don't get hot or cold as much as old people. Relative difference, they say, the ancient skeptics. Similar to this, if there was no honey, figs would be the sweetest thing. Figs would be sugar itself to people. We now have sugarcane from India, plenty refined, etc. People need more refined white sugar in their lives, of course. That will bring them perspective a little too soon. So for Xenophanes, the world within the cosmos, again, is eternal. He says the rainbow is not a goddess, but a multicolored cloud, which doesn't mean he does not believe there are no goddesses. All things, including rainbows, are made of earth and water. Air comes from water, such as wind from the ocean. He argued apparently these things, notice he is taught by Anaximander. He is concerned with whether water and wind make what and how, because fire, earth, air, water, and that is chemistry to these folks and physics. The opposition of wet water and dry earth, again picking this up very much from the Milesians, is the primary dynamic of elemental interactions, rather than the hot and cold for Anaximander or dense and rare for Anaximenes. I don't have much notation on Anaximenes. I have skipped over for now doing the video about him because it would be very short. But yes, Anaximander actually would blow with a cold mouth and then with an open mouth, and try to show that more squeezed together is cold, which actually is sort of not true in several ways, but let's not parse the physics, or modern understandings on all of that. But he was trying to demonstrate, again with simple demonstrations, as were the Milesians, that there is hot and cold and that they have certain physical interactions with the mouth, with bellows, in metallurgy, not blacksmith yet, that yes, something like the physical interactions of things. Xenophanes did say, for anyone who's interested in the natural sciences, that seashells and fossils of fish found in the mountains, which he hiked up and saw, and you can hike up in the Berkeley Hills and see that here in this town, showed that those lands were underwater previously, and that the earth had interacted with the water such that the water had been used up and the mud congealed into stone. This is quite correct, in fact, other than the production of the elements out of all water and earth, and what have you, rather. And again, Big Bang may or may not have happened if folks know stuff in Hawaii from observatories, etc. Consult your future cosmologists about all of that. To explain this, Xenophanes says the world alternates between wet and dry periods, and humanity dies out in the wet periods and flourishes in the dry periods. Many people, Mayans and Indians, thought that the world goes in cycles. That was the 2012 thing-ish with the Mayans somewhat, that there are wet and then dry cycles. The earth emerges out of the water, a la Genesis, and then things may get chaotic and change back again. This would be summer and winter in a longer projection of seasons themselves, etc. Seems to be the way that Indians and Greeks and others got to that idea. How would they know the seasons themselves would have seasons? Well, from seasons, that there's an uber hot season coming of hot and cold seasons. It's like Indian kalpas. Xenophanes is also seemingly trying to explain the flood stories of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia and Noah of the Judaic Old Testament, as a great flood wiped out civilization, then grew back. By the way, as did mention, Alexander was the first to politically unify Greece, and did only briefly. He said, some of you believe King Helen had 3 sons. Noah supposedly had 3 sons. That myth explains all the diverse peoples of places where they have one father, but then there's many sons, and then they go on to be the tribes of humanity that people can see, or the tribes of the Greeks that people can see. The Helen having 3 sons is weirdly similar in ways, not in others, to Noah having 3 sons. And then even Barbara Bush randomly was quoted as saying Hamites, which actually means that Barbara Bush seemed to believe until recently that black people are descended from Noah's 3rd cursed son Ham, which I will not get into right now why that's a bit controversial. That black people are marked out of sin and thus Noah's cursed son. Yeah, but if you were trying to do, early science along with religion and figure out genetics, you would occasionally refer to people as Hamites or Mongoloids or, other things like that, which are all now dated terms. And I guess they dated in high school and don't date anymore. I'm not sure. But that was years ago, thankfully. And I was young and in love. So, yes, I've never entertained theories like that, but the theories and the theories and the theories and the 3 sons leading to tribes, that's something of Mesopotamia, Babylon, and then you find that in the Israelites, you find that in the Greeks. How much is this the same exact story? There's 3 gods come along and order the cosmos, land over water. How much is this all the same? Well, we know what we know, which is that those are the similarities. Anaximander seems to think the world is in a drying, dying period, but many believe that he saw the drying as a final phase before it is absorbed back into the infinite, possibly as some apocalyptic cataclysm, and then will that cycle again, perhaps. Indian thought sees itself as the high noon of humanity. Buddha is high noon. Mahavir are high noon for them, for those traditions, and for the Hindus, they themselves are. And guess what stage we're in? We're in the drying, dying, declining stage. It's not exactly a drying stage necessarily, but if it goes high noon in the circle of the cosmos, guess where we are? We're on the downslope when we're losing religion, meaning losing community, thought, philosophy, art, science, and now humanity is dying. That's according to India. Hopefully they're revitalizing themselves through YouTube and other such sources. I am sure they are. And yes, other than that, heck, are we going to be around for the next run of things? Well, perhaps in another life we were a sardine and perhaps another a cucumber, as Heraclitus seems to ridicule Pythagoras for. The final note on drinking alcohol, Xenophanes says it is not wrong to drink as much as an elderly person such that they can get home without the assistance of servants, which I guess is as good a drinking plan for anyone. If you need to call an Uber, again, you are Uber wasted, I suppose. No plugging of Uber here. Again, may that lift your spirits. So, yeah, it was a problem at the time, clearly. Everybody got over that problem. And he says a great person speaks of virtue and noble deeds when they drink, unlike others who speak of bawdy and base subjects when they drink. Clearly, it's not drinking, but the topic of conversation that comes up when you, what is in vino veritas, which is not Greek but Latin, of course, is that when you get drunk, that brings the truth out, and then you actually know how people are, which is unfortunately uncomfortably true today as it was in the past, So yeah. Anyway, that is Xenophanes. Again, fascinating thinker. He is one of the ones we know less about. So it is very important to get into these guys and talk a bunch about this before we get to Plato and Aristotle and anybody else, because they know all about this and they are wrestling back and forth with this guy by name and others and trying to do better than these guys with the pieces these guys are supplying, which then allows us to think a lot about how we think as human beings about art, science, religion, and see that in Indian, Chinese, as well as Greek thought. Anyway, hope you guys are good. I will probably try to crank out another video or two about Greek philosophy or Buddhist philosophy because the construction's being all right and the cats seem to be taking a nap. So yeah, hope you guys are okay. Sorry if there's also issues with earlier videos I put out with the speech not matching up to the audio, the video and audio matching up. I am figuring out the programs as I figure them out for myself. And pandemic means I am lonely. So I am talking into this camera, and yes. Anyway, much love, guys. I will see you guys when you see me next, and I probably won't see any of you if it's through YouTube. So much happiness.